Hi, I'm Mandy Sampson here at Channel 4, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the review of chapters 1 through 3 in our book. And I chose to, as our topic, the words we use to describe others are very important for disabilities. We should use current terminology like disability and person first language. So, in my discussion upon that topic, I'm going to start with the current terminology. The terminology may be physical, cognitive, mental, sensory, emotional development, or some combination of all of those. The term disability is a limitation that is a result of an impairment. Examples of a disability are loss of limb, loss of vision or memory loss, or in the inability to walk. So there is functional limitations to activities when we are talking about disability. So just remember that part, because when I get into handicap, there is a definite difference. So speaking about handicap, the definition for that is when is caused by an individual that encounters a situation based on external factors. Some examples of that are being bedridden or confined to a home, unable to use public transportation, and being socially isolated. So not being able to accomplish something one might want to do. So this is more along the lines of the can't. And so the major differences between disability and handicapped is that disability is a functional limitation to activities, and handicap is more or less the can't, or the physical or mental impairment. So it's a problem with a structure or an organ of the body. It's a disadvantage in filling a role in life relative to a peer group. So that is one of the major differences of disability versus handicap. So the next thing I'm going to get into is using person-first terminology. This began back in 1974, and it is basically when you speak of individual first, then the disability. Now it goes a step further. It's individual identity, then disability. So nowadays, that's how it is done. So when speaking of person first terminology, it's what condition a person has rather than asserting what a person is. So I have some examples of that I'm going to go through, but there is many things of examples out there posted behind me. I think I'm going to show you one as far as an example goes. But I'm just going to read through a couple that we make mistakes on, and that we need to be more aware of and correct ourselves on. So when we refer to autistic, the correct way to refer to somebody who has autistic is stating their name. So like, say, example, Joey has autism. When you hear people say crippled, we need to correct them and say, well, this is the way we need to say it now. Again, state the person's name, has a disability. Very derogatory term when we say that, so we don't ever want to talk that way. And then another people you hear people say is the disabled adults, children, or voters that are disabled. Instead of saying those things, we need to say people with disabilities, children with disabilities, adults with disabilities, voters with disabilities. You don't hear too much of this anymore when people talk about this. They, maybe this is more like back in the 70s, but you hear people say feeble-minded. That's also a derogatory term to refer to disability people. And we need to change that and say the person's name has a cognitive disability. So we want to make sure we're careful. So like, say, you could say somebody's name. I'm just going to say Joey. Joey has a cognitive disability instead of feeble-minded. So again, people also say a handicap or handicapped, referring to something handicapped. We don't longer say that. And you still have a lot of people saying that nowadays. I hear a lot of people say that. So instead of saying that, you need to say a disability accessible buses instead of handicap buses, like say accessible. Something is accessible, not handicap. So examples of that is parking accessible, people with disabilities, people with a mental health condition, person with a mental health condition. Okay, so those are things that we want to make sure we're saying instead of handicap. You also heard this said a lot, and it's a derogatory term, and it's a very insulting term. People say moron, and moron is not a nice word. Never should be said to anybody. People say it in joking ways, and sometimes refer to handicapped people as this, or I'm sorry, disability people as this. So we should be actually saying a person with a mental health condition or a person with a disability. Some other ones that you might hear: learning disabled. You know, a lot of people refer to people as learning disabled. We want to say instead has a learning disability. We also say wheelchair bound, which we should not say. And we should refer to those people as person who uses a wheelchair, mobility chair. So it's a person. So I want to get into also the next thing you're going to hear is identity first. So a lot of people use identity first instead of people first. So identity first is a descriptor of a person first, done with the characteristic in question as an integral part of a person's identity and community membership. So when we get into saying stuff like identity first, an example of that might be autistic children. So that's basically integral part of a person's identity. And taken from the Journal of Autism, and that was on December 2nd, 2022, just recently, 87% of people with disabilities prefer the identity first. Not to say everybody does, but most do. So the question is, what do we do? Like, what do we use referring to a disabled individual? Do we use identity first, or do we use person first? So whenever you're in doubt of that, use person first language. It's just the polite language and etiquette, polite language etiquette to use. So we always want to make sure we use that first. So person first is always the best route to go. So now I'm going to get on a topic that kind of, when I was researching this stuff, it wasn't part of the book, but when I was growing up, it was a term that was used quite often to refer to people of disabilities and made fun of. And we call it the R slur. So the word is retard. And it dates back as far as 1426, meaning to hinder or slow. Word to decelerate would become more common. So not to accentuate this term, obviously, because it's a very, very derogatory term, and also a slang term that is insulting to those of disabilities. But when I was growing up, it was used quite a bit. It's very offensive, but it back in the day was a medical term known in the 19th and 20th centuries to describe children with intellectual disabilities. Up until the 1960s, moron, idiot, cretin, and imbecile were also non-offensive words. If you can believe it, non-offensive, find it very offensive to refer to people with mental intellectual disabilities and low intelligence. So words replaced with terms handicapped and disabled. Now, disabled is more a polite term than handicapped. So just so you know, because it's tying back into what I spoke about, the definitions in the beginning and how they are used and why they are used and what we should do with them. The term, the R slur, is used more or less in teasing with friends or in a general insult. Still used today. Some people I hear, and I correct them when I see them, using that R slur. It's a very offensive word and should never be said to anybody, jokingly or not. or thrown as an insult. So I find it very offensive. And just to give you some background, political background, as far as like in legal background, as far as the that word goes. So as of 2010, mental retardation was still written in many of our laws and documents. I found this online recently. It has nothing to do with our books because our book is kind of a little bit maybe outdated a little bit, or isn't currently up to date with the current laws. So I kind of went on a limb here and did my own research. President Barack Obama recently, when he was president, replaced the term with intellectual disability with approval of Rosa's law that required laws and documents to phase out the terms with the intellectual disability. So on October 5th, 2010, Obama signed S.2781 into law. The bill changed references in federal law, named after Rosa Marcelino, a 9-year-old girl. Yes, 9-year-old girl. Very amazing. With Down syndrome, who worked with her parents to have the words mentally retarded officially removed from Health and Education Code in Maryland, her home state. I think she's a very, 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 very big hero. I feel like she did something very awesome for the disabled community at 9 years old. So, with this new law, thanks to Rosa, mental retardation and mentally retarded no longer exists in federal health or education or labor policy. Way to go, Rosa. So, when referring to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities is showing respect. So we need to just make sure that we're using the correct terminology for our disabled community. Again, off topic, not quite inside the book, but I'm going to speak on something personal right now. And I actually am an aide to a student in a middle school that is blind. And in music class with this student, I hear an event taking place. The students were referring to this Jeffy. And when they referred to something I don't know nothing about, because I'm older, I, in turn, look it up. So I did look that up. And what I found was appalling and very sad. I was very upset. So just so you all know, YouTube is still playing Jeffy. And what Jeffy really is a puppet. Is a character with videos on YouTube from 2021 and 2022 that children still view and still use and still talk about, obviously, in school. He reinforces cruel and insensitive stereotypes with children with disabilities. The videos are out there and are still being watched today as I speak. I'm very angered and saddened by this. Our children need to know better. They need to be educated about children with disabilities and how we refer to them. I feel more needs to be done in our education system to make sure that our children and youth are educated on this. So for me, personally, I will be writing YouTube, emailing, and calling to have those removed. I feel nobody in their right mind should be watching disability videos making fun of those who have disabilities. It angers me that even today, we still have to fight for those who have disabilities. I'm Mandy Sampson, reporting live here for Channel 4 News. Have a great day.